skipped the convention saying he doesn't need the party's endorsement. It's too fractured. And he's had more to say too. So is the Republican Party splintering, and who would that be good or bad for?
I'll jump in on this one. I'm not sure that it's necessarily splintering, but I am absolutely convinced, and Sandeep probably knows this at a deeper level, certainly than I do, that he didn't need the endorsement. And in fact, not getting the endorsement probably helps him a lot in terms of the moderates who he is trying to pull over, the people who are frustrated with Olympia from, let's just say, capital. This is, I think, from a Reichert standpoint, is a boon. Like, he is absolutely going to pull those more conservative Democrats and a whole bunch of libertarians right into his camp. Now, whether or not that's a total numbers that are going to matter in terms of the election, I don't know, but I don't see this as a downside. Is it fracturing the party, to your question? Wow. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty fractured. Both parties to some degree are. So I don't know.
Yeah, I Mike, I got to disagree with you. I don't think it's helpful for Reichert that this happened. I mean, first of all, the convention itself was a chaotic mess. Bill, as you allude to, there was all this disagreement, and
I didn't say chaotic, by the way.
Well,
I feel that's a little. I've heard that word, but they had a process. They overruled the party. They followed a process. It seemed
Jim Walsh, the MAGA Republican Party chair, complained that the word chaotic was being used, and I'm going to use it because it was chaotic, and he can complain all he wants, but the truth was it was a chaotic mess. And in fact, it reinforces, I think, the Republican Party's image as a hyper polarized Trumpist clown car right now in a way that's not at all helpful for anybody running on the Republican banner, including, Dave Reichert or Jamie Harrell Butler, the former congresswoman who is running for lands commissioner.
But the parties, and certainly these organizations, this is where you pull in. This is not a representation of the party. You know this. I mean, not the representation of the party as a whole. This is if you wanted to put out a magnet for all of the polarizing people in a party, go to a convention.
No, totally. No. But there's no way for Reichert or Jamie Harrell Butler to win unless the Republican Party. It's the prerequisite is they need a unified base of the party behind them, and then they can build outward. Then they have to build outward. We're a blue state, right? And to your point, they need to get independents and more conservative Democrats to come along too for them to have to win. But when they have a fragmented party where a huge chunk of the party now thinks they're rhinos, right? Republicans in name only, or is denouncing them, or sellout and traitors. It's very hard to see how you build a majority on such a fractured foundation.
Well, someone with that viewpoint would certainly find that convention chaotic.
Yeah.
Katherine, anything to add?
I was just thinking about Danny Westney's column on the convention that talked about some of the non-endorsement related news that came out of it, including that instructions for GOP candidates to no longer use the word democracy or democratic. We are now aiming to be a republic and supporting republicanism if we're in the Washington State GOP, as well as calling for an end to mail-in voting. Neither of those things strike me as particularly positive developments, but interested to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think?
I thought actually bringing that up was a great idea. The mail-in voting thing is just, I don't know. It's so nakedly toward a particular that it's almost like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not necessarily going to go full clown car, but I'm going to say that it is so brazen and so ridiculous that I don't know what you benefit by even putting that out there.
I noticed they didn't try to repeal the initiative process, which is direct democracy that benefits Republicans.
But it's just really self-destructive, right? Yeah. I mean, mail-in voting is really well established in Washington State. We've been using it. We went kind of full mail-in around 2007. It's been a long, it works there. Our former Republican Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, was a huge advocate of mail-in voting. And so these are the sorts of kind of extreme, polarized, sort of and Trumpy, right, positions that make it really, really difficult for Republicans to win races in a blue state like Washington. And even at a time when I think there is significant frustration with the status quo and with the Democratic majorities potentially in Olympia and the exiting 3-term Democratic governor, right? But they're not going to win if this is the kind of stuff that they're going to run on.
And Sandeep is not going to be afraid to criticize the Democratic Party when we come back from a break with viewpoint diversity in public radio. That is Sandeep Kaushik. We have Katherine Long from Business Insider. We have Mike Lewis with Geekwire. I'm Bill Radke, and we'll come right back with more of KUOW's Week in Review.
57 degrees in Seattle. Chance of rain this afternoon and rain likely tomorrow and Sunday. It's 12:28.
Support for KUOW comes from Cambium Landscape. Since 1998, working with clients' tastes and home architecture to create landscapes that complement their outdoor lifestyles, whether relaxing in the spa, dining al fresco, or playing pickleball. Photos, reels, and more info on Instagram at Cambium Landscape.
A newspaper staff under surveillance with drones.
The window was open and the drone entered and stayed there like for a minute.
Strangers controlling their phones.
Every day, constantly hacking and rehacking every time this person would restart his phone.
I had someone living in my phone next to me, turning on the microphone, turning on the camera.
Spying on journalists on the next Reveal.
That's tonight at 8 o'clock on 94.9 KUOW.
You are with KUOW's Week in Review. Well done on that. I'm Bill Radke. You can watch the show if you want. We're on YouTube. Search KUOW and tell us how we look. And our panel, introduce our panel again from Business Insider. Katherine Long is here. Geekwire's Mike Lewis, and from the Seattle Nice podcast, political affairs consultant Sandeep Kaushik. I'm Bill Radke. On this program, we work to bring you differing viewpoints. This region is generally liberal, and you hear that, but we also bring you guests from the Free Market Washington Policy Center, from the Chamber of Commerce. Nikki Haley's campaign chair was on the other day. Sarah Nelson from the City Council. I don't know if most people call her a super liberal. We got a conservative talk show host coming up, and the former Republican Attorney General will be here, I think, next week. Still, many listeners do tell me that they agree with former NPR senior business editor Yuri Berliner, who wrote a column in the Free Press saying NPR has become too knee-jerk, too activist, and too scolding. A listener named Adam writes, until about 3 years ago, I listened to NPR religiously. I frequently gave. Now I feel that it's gone off the deep end. Too much of it is way too Orwellian. As someone who's center-left, I'm feeling repelled by the current trends and language gymnastics. Too much demonizing of people who aren't progressive enough. Please, I hope you'll give some credence to ideas of viewpoint diversity. You're just not trustworthy anymore, says Adam. Sandeep, are you one of those listeners saying hallelujah?
To that comment,
Yeah.
I think that comment is indicative of a real problem that NPR and public radio does have, right? I mean, there was a New York Times story the other day about the crisis in NPR where they sort of frame it as NPR is like really rapidly shedding millions and millions of listeners over the last 4 or 5 years, right? That coincide with the sort of the post George Floyd era. And,
As are a lot of media, though.
as are a lot of media,
listeners.
but much more so than commercial radio. The precipitous decline of NPR is worse than at other comparable institutions. And I would just suggest for anyone, not only read that story and read how NPR responds in that story, which seems to be very kind of clueless and tone deaf and in denial about the problem they're facing, but read the reader comments on the story. New York Times readers, right? Liberally inclined, educated, thousands and thousands of people liking comments saying basically NPR has gone too far down what I would call a quote unquote identitarian sort of centering to the exclusion a very narrow set of views about race and identity and social justice in ways where those views are seen as sacrosanct. And there's not a willingness to acknowledge that those views are actually contested and quite narrowly held by a certain segment of sort of progressive opinion. But even sort of normie liberals, sort of people like me, traditional libs, like actually disagree with some of those ideas and principles. And there's just a sense that anybody who doesn't agree with these views is some kind of reactionary, knuckle dragging probably racist, because that's where I think NPR's problem is a lot of their liberal listenership is not very happy or not very comfortable or not in agreement with the turn. And I don't think there's any question that there's been a turn in public radio and how they cover all these issues.
Anyone else?
So this is a tough one too for me to pick apart and analyze because I think I'd need a lot more information before I did. But I would say that it's a shame. I think that the Yuri Berliner piece is what brought this conversation to the fore because it was kind of a poorly done piece. And it wasn't, it was so easy to pick apart just in terms of basic information. Like it was a lousy bit of reporting that I would have hoped he would have edited had he been the editor on that piece.
It was ironically poor journalism. That doesn't necessarily mean he didn't have a larger point, but I agree.
Well, and it doesn't mean he certainly didn't have a larger effect, right?
Yeah,
Which was why we're talking about it right now. I've always said that news organizations, because everybody, all of us, anybody who's been in the media, Sandeep, when you were, Bill, I'm sure we've all had this from our family members about, people who make blanket criticisms of media, vis-a-vis liberal or not so much conservative, but let's just add that in there. And I've always said, look, it's very easy to make a balanced story. It's very easy for me to go out and get opinions from a variety of sides, not just two sides, but a variety of sides. And I did that my whole career. I said the way you should judge a news organization for good or ill is what they choose to cover, not how they cover things. Because a decision to not cover something and a decision to cover something else is a much more profound decision in terms of a news organization. Like what you decide isn't news and what you decide is news is a much better way to, but I don't understand. So this NPR kerfluffle, while important, I think is not really addressing what I would say is the more interesting thing. I would love to see topically, if we're going to discuss about NPR, but I'd say I'd go with New York Times, any big media organizations topically, what these organizations have covered and how that has changed over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And maybe then I would be able to make some more decisions about left wing. But I don't know that I would look at a lot of what NPR does and say left leaning. A lot of it, the bulk of it is pretty straight ahead journalism. I understand that these other things do happen, and the New York Times, these other things do happen, but honestly, I see some quality journalism there. Yeah. You remember that on Fox, their polling people and their polling reporters were excellent. They were not a little bit good. They were some of the best in the business. You can find it in there. You can also find, you can saddle up on your confirmation bias and find whatever you want, right?
Katherine? Yeah, I want to underline some of what Mike said. It's not. I would also like more data before I come to any conclusions about the purported hard progressive bias of NPR. I also wonder whether we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit, right? I mean, there's been such a major change in people who consume media in the last 10 years, right? There's been such a major change in the electorate, in what people think of media, what people think of identity politics, how people are able to identify what they define as identity politics or identitarian. And I wonder, is it the case that NPR changed drastically, or is it the case that its listeners changed drastically and their perception of NPR's reporting has changed along with that? Trust in media is very low. We're increasingly seen as the enemy, and I wonder if some of those attitudes are filtering into perceptions of how NPR's reporting is or is not biased.
Look, I do think there have been changes at the audience level, and and for instance, on the political right, like a lot of kind of conservative people have sort of decamped into their own sort of self-contained media ecosystem of it's not just Fox News, but there's a whole world of conservative news where you can go and basically have your priors ratified. But I don't think that there's any credible argument that there hasn't been a significant shift in public radio about how certain issues are covered. Let me just throw out a couple of precepts or beliefs, right? Colorblindness, however unattainable, is a worthwhile goal to pursue in our society.
But that's not a neutral. That is a viewpoint. It's not like that's neutrality to have that.
Right, but that is a view. But my point, Bill, is that is a viewpoint that is held by 75+% of Americans in the United States, not just people on the right, but many people on the left, you'll find large majorities of people of color and yet we have public radio saying, "Oh, that's terrible and wrong."
Well, is it the job of public radio to confirm people's priors?
I think it's the job of public radio to cover the controversy and not piously pick a side in it.
And
right?
I think that NPR has covered the controversy over that. I mean,
I think NPR's coverage and.
Can I point something out? Just to add, some of this we've said. There is a big strain of it's gone too far. I mean, I'm not picking on Adam. I don't know Adam, but he says it's Orwellian and says identifies as being center left, and there's demonizing. So I do think, maybe to what Katherine was saying, I think there's a strain of it was okay when NPR was too liberal. And by the way, NPR is not revolutionary and Marxist. I've heard my whole career that they're too liberal and that they're too status quo, comfy conservative, small conservative. But I think I do pick up a strain from emails I get from listeners of it was okay when they were just liberal, but now I'm be the bad guy because whether it's politics, maybe I'm getting older. Maybe I'm white. Maybe I'm a landowner. Maybe nothing to do with those. But for whatever reason, I am center left, and I'm being made to feel guilty and wrong, and the bad guy. And that will make any of your opinions extra juice when you're angry. And if I'm not talking to you, listener, I'm not talking to you.
Again, because I'm not a white person, right? I really, this is something that actually kind of has pissed me off in the last few years. When I see public radio is a big offender in this regard, the only views that are sort of platformed on what racism is, how race works in America, are a set of views that most people of color in the United States don't subscribe to, right? And those voices are bad. So whatever about the white libs that don't like it, but I'm a center left person of color, and why the hell are the kind of viewpoints about race that I know lots and lots of the Black and Asian and
I agree
subscribe to, why are they being ignored for the activist views that happen to align with the views of sort of educated progressive, right? And those things are getting platform and of the diversity of viewpoints within communities of color. Right? And I think that's where NPR and public radio is better served in trying to kind of explore that debate.
well, I mean, the program right before this was platforming a variety of views of people of color about a controversy that affects people of color, and I think
and I'm platforming you right now.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. And thank you. I mean, I'm probably canceled after this.
not at all.
No.
And if you're all canceled, we're canceled by the tree lobby.
Andy, don't mess this up.
I know. Between the tree people and the identitarians, we're,
I mean, I'm just saying. I agree. I'm not saying this. I just think people feel ignored. With something feels like your point of view is not ignored. I think it's a little exaggerated, but I think you can feel that way if you hear over and over that a point of view that maybe you don't. It's not really your life experience, and it puts you on the spot. And I just think both of those can be true.
Well, a super important point here, because this gets sort of muddled a lot in this conversation, which is a fraught conversation, right? We're touching on really deeply held people's deeply held beliefs about really personal issues, right? And I have strong feelings, my own experience of race in America about what works, what doesn't. But NPR sort of defense of this is that we're just looking to create greater diversity, right, within our organization, and absolutely, that's an incredibly important and valuable goal. Like, I don't want to minimize the value of that and that desire. It's the question of what NPR did or tried to do it, which, by the way, as the New York Times points out, is it working pretty well for them? Because what they did was their question.
Are you saying the NPR ought to be, the goal should be the most financial success possible?
I'm saying it should be the best journalism possible,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Right.
Agreed.
And what the shift is that the just recent CEO of NPR, his announcement that the North Star of NPR was going to be this race and social justice agenda. It wasn't about great journalism. It was about pursuing certain that's where things start to go off the rails. I think.
We really could say a lot more about that, but we
Yeah.
do have a whole week of news to cover. Is there anything, Mike? I feel like I jumped over you.
No, I mean, I was going to add something, but we're rolling ahead. I did want to say one funny aside that somewhat dovetails into this. So I do work on, obviously, here and on KUOW Radio as well as a fill-in host there. And it's, if it wasn't apparent that they were Democrats, it's very apparent in who responds. If I am on this show or I'm on NPR, all of my professional white collar friends, other journalists, will, hey, I heard you on the show, blah blah blah. Maybe they liked it, maybe. And none of the people, I also, for those who don't know, I'm also co-owner of a bar here in Seattle. When I'm on NPR, none of the delivery drivers say a thing. When I am on KUOW, none of my friends, none of my my journalism colleagues, generally speaking, haven't heard me on KUOW. When I'm on KUOW, every delivery driver who comes to the bar, and this is an interesting. There's such a radical, just my small sample size, but it has been consistent for years now. There's a radical shift in the demographics of the two places, and who and at what income level, blue versus white collar, and that also factors in. You have what comes along with that is race as well and economic status, and it's very different how both are which groups both are reaching, and both are missing groups, and both are actually hitting groups fairly hard and consistently, but rarely outside of that. It feels like to me. And that's just anecdotally.
We really have got to talk about other things, Katherine. Okay.
I'll just say one thing quickly. One thing that this conversation has evinced to me is the disparity between how often people say that they want me to challenge them to present new viewpoints, and then how in reality it seems like they prefer to do that less often.
That is sometimes my sense. And I'm going to hear from listeners who are going to say that I said that's always my sense, and that's just not true. I found much to agree with in what everybody said, and this is a good conversation. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate you having this conversation. I mean, I think that's healthy and good, right?
Well, for your last time on the show.
Yeah. I'm just going to cancel it. Yeah, I will say contesting some of these just outside, not even in terms of media, but just in the broader culture of Seattle, it's sometimes pretty fraught and pretty difficult.
Absolutely.
Like there are some very strongly held views that deviate from trouble, which is why I think I've been talk about.
We can do this.
Yeah.
We can do this, Seattle. Okay, we got to take a break and come back on KUOW's Week in Review because we have more week to review. So don't go away.
When it comes to our mental health care system, there's a common narrative. The state shut down big psychiatric hospitals and released people to the streets. Deinstitutionalization would happen, but the story is much more complicated than most people realize. This is The Lost Patients, a new podcast from KUOW and the Seattle Times.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. Timothy Egan launches the paperback edition of his new book, A Fever in the Heartland, the Ku Klux Klan's plot to take over America and the woman who stopped them. Thursday, June 6th at 7 p.m. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com. And from Seattle Roots Community Health. Serving the community for more than 50 years, Country Doctor Community Health Centers is now Seattle Roots Community Health. New name, same patient-focused healthcare in the Central District and Capitol Hill. Accepting new patients. SeattleRoots.org.
This KUOW's Week in Review. Listen to that laughter. Still friends. Civil dialogue with Sandeep Kaushik, Public Affairs Consultant, Business Insider's Katherine Long, Geekwire's Mike Lewis, and I'm Bill Radke. We had good discussions to the point where we got to just whip through some stories in short form here and see what we can get to. East Side Light Rail opening tomorrow, Saturday. Number 2 line, the 2 line connecting South Bellevue to Redmond, not with Seattle yet. I-90 connection across the lake is jacked up and won't be open until at least next year. Grizzly bears will be reintroduced to North Cascades National Park. KUOW environment reporter John Ryan told us up to 7 grizzlies a year will be airlifted in, which I'd like to watch.
Many rural residents living nearby have opposed the plan, citing the danger of bears attacking hikers or farmers. Wildlife officials say attacks are unlikely, especially if people learn how to avoid provoking the bears.
Katherine, you and I were talking about they're going to put trackers on these bears.
Yes, and what I would love to see is an app showing me where all the bears are so I can avoid them. Roll it out, Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Do it. I kind of wanted bear cams, like body cams, but I think it's not happening. High-capacity gun magazines will stay illegal for now in our state. The state Supreme Court keeping the ban in place while they review it. State appeals panel ruled downtown Seattle property owners owe the city $16 million for the new waterfront. The city taxed them, saying, well, you're going to benefit from the waterfront. And some property owners said that's arbitrary, and the pandemic has made downtown less valuable. Let's see. I wanted to hear a little, Katherine, about your story in Business Insider about the American Kennel Club's pedophile problem. So will you tell us what that's about?
Yeah, I looked into the American Kennel Club. For decades, people who have gone to dog shows and are involved in dog shows, which is a huge sport with tens of thousands of events nationwide each year, have been asking the American Kennel Club to enact stronger rules on whether people who have been convicted of certain crimes, like crimes against children, can continue to participate in the sport. The American Kennel Club has said basically we don't think that that's our role, and the upshot of that is that I identified a significant number of people who had been convicted of sexually abusing children and were then allowed to return to the sport. I profiled one case in Texas of a professional handler who abused his young teenage assistant over the course of several months, all at dog shows. He went to jail for 12 years, and when he came out, he returned to the sport of dog shows, and his victim encountered him at shows over and over again. She said she was terrified, and the American Kennel Club, which oversees the sport, did nothing about it. Now, the American Kennel Club is responding to this. There's been a lot of hubbub in the dog show world, and they say they're going to roll out some new rules that are more closely in line with what other organizations like 4-H, Boy Scouts, the American Equestrian Association already has regulating child-adult interactions. So we'll see what that is like when they do it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for reporting on that. I want to mention Mike, the Federal Trade Commission is banning non-compete clauses. And these are agreements that an employee signs after you leave employment. You can't, is that right? You can't work for a competing company.
Sign it on the way in frequently.
On the way in, yeah.
Not on the way out.
Not on the way out. No.
If they're trying to get you signed on the way out, you wouldn't sign this thing at all.
Right. You can't start a competing business a certain amount of time. So that's
competing
that's
employer, all kind. Yeah, they've been criticized for quite a long time it's not just the tech community. Tech community made it famous, but it's been out there. I mean, there were stories from the AG's office here in Washington State of stereo installation shops, having non-compete clauses so that people literally couldn't get a job at the other stereo installation shop across town, which was ridiculous. And so finally, Washington State got out in front of this. I mean, the FTC, weirdly enough, is following Washington State's lead and saying no. And the nice thing about this so a non-compete clause essentially limits your ability to get a job in the same industry. Some of them are very, very detailed. Some of them are not. This essentially, the FTC said, done. These are not, this is not something that's supportable anymore. It's great. A lot of companies, Microsoft famously moved away from them not that long ago. I think this is great. This is a nice thing about this issue is it doesn't really cross the, liberal versus conservative. People who want job mobility are in favor of this. Companies also benefit from this because they can now recruit much more heavily from other companies. This is great for wages. It's great for mobility. It's much better for employees, and it takes the power away from giant corporations to say, hey, not only can we control your work here, we can control your work elsewhere, which was always the sort of the ridiculous component of it. And I get it.
It's not unanimous, though. The Chamber of Commerce sued over it. They said it's stifling innovation.
Surprising coming from the Chamber of Commerce, I know.
Well, but I'm saying there are differing viewpoints.
Oh no, there's differing viewpoints. But you
they
get my
also
drift.
said there's a bad precedent for government micromanaging business. Yeah, it's the chamber point of view.
Yeah, well, whatever. I mean, the chamber knew that this was going to
You're
go
lumping
well.
them in with the tree people again.
Yeah.
And the idea is to protect intellectual property, trade secrets. that
Sure,
kind of
which
thing,
is
but-
still all protected.
Yeah,
This doesn't take any of that away.
And Washington State already has a rule along these lines.
Absolutely, for mostly for higher income, because they were finding it going to like coffee shops. They were doing non-compete, like you couldn't go to the coffee shop across town, which was ridiculous. And so the Washington rule was 100,000 plus, right? I mean, I think that's what it was. And so I think this is great. I think the FTC, and the FTC, as an aside, kind of needed a win anyway, because the FTC has like pushed a lot of things that has not gone as well as I think the FTC would have liked. This one was a win.
We have why am I talking? We have a Business Insider reporter here
Yeah.
as well. Any comment, Katherine?
Oh, I went as soon as this rule was announced. I went to the Twitter feed of a source, an Amazon employee who was sued by the company when he went to go work for Google. Amazon said it violated his non-compete, and here's what he had to say about the FTC rule. He said, "I cannot be happier to see the FTC ruling to ban non-competes. What a fantastic day for employees! Employees equal people."
There you go.
Sandeep, you good?
No, I think it's great. Look, there was a good Geekwire story about this, and I thought one of the people that was being quoted, and it said, particularly in the tech industry, right, which is where with Amazon and stuff, we've seen this sort of non-compete stuff used aggressively, and the person who was being quoted was somebody who had worked at Amazon and then moved to Google and got sued by Amazon, and made the point at the end of the article, it's great that this non-compete stuff is going away, but there's non-disclosure agreements, right? Which is a better way to handle some of the issues around proprietary information, or, hey, we have these sort of technological processes that you shouldn't take to the other company. No, a non-disclosure agreement in that case makes sense, but the non-compete, that's crazy, right? And so this was a good move by the FTC.
Okay, listen, Seattle Public Schools dropping its highly capable cohort, which when I was a kid, they called accelerated learners or gifted and talented, superior learners, it was called in one school.
Favored.
I remember. What's that? Favored.
Yeah.
The chosen. So Seattle Schools is phasing this out in favor of keeping students together in the same classroom, right? So teachers would make individual learning plans for each student.
One quick thing. So we actually have a gifted student here in the studio with us, do we not?
Oh my gosh, yes we do. Yes we do. Former gifted student, calling in.
All right.
Two, actually, but yeah.
Oh, you too?
Oh, yeah.
Am I it?
Oh, wait a minute. Two. You want me to be honest? This sounds braggy.
Oh no, you too.
3, yes.
Wow.
Okay.
I guess I know who's not
Mike
going to be on the show
Jackson
again.
is the interview now.
See, this is NPR's real problem. It's too gifted.
Well, I do notice.
I'm representing the common person here.
Right. But the three highly capable cohort folks, they're white and Asian, which is an issue in schools, right? That's what these programs tend to be made up of, and the school system doesn't want to give extra advantages to this group or segregate kids more, have higher, lower performing students together could benefit the kids, they say. Any reaction, comment? What should the listener know about that?
I'm so in favor of this decision. I think it was a long time coming. I mean, the evidence that we have on gifted programs is that there is very little evidence. There's very little evidence that they do anything to boost the test scores of the children who are in them.
Mine did not help me. Not being a faux self-deprecating, I was a crappy student going in and a crappy student going out. It's true. Trust me.
But I certainly do empathize with parents who obviously want the best possible educational opportunities for their kids. I think the data points us in the direction of saying that maybe gifted programs are not that.
I think it's a terrible, I would say almost idiotic and certainly self-destructive decision on the part of the school district. I think we're already seeing a huge sort of flight of families and parents out of the district. I think in part because of, some of these policies that have been pursued. I think that's just going to continue to happen. I mean, parents of means who can put their kids in private schools are going to continue to pull them out and do so. And that's bad for everyone. Every study on education shows that having a diversity of not just, racial and ethnic diversity, but income diversity in classrooms leads to better learning experiences for all kids.
Well, they don't have to pull their kids out.
They don't have to, but they're going to. Because even the Seattle Times story that announced this, right, was sort of had set the scene in a classroom where the teachers sort of spending all their time teaching the regular kids, and the supposedly gifted kids who are going to get the same level are just sort of off in a corner with an iPad, right, teaching themselves, right? No, parents, I'm sorry, I'm on my kid is actually in the Seattle HCC program. He's going to graduate this year, so he's not going to be impacted by this. But if he was entering elementary school right now, we have the means that we would probably take our kid out and send him to a private school. And I think that's a real problem for the district that they've already been extremely reluctant to probe why so many parents are taking their kids out of the district, because I think they're afraid of what they're going to hear.
Okay, we got a minute left. What if we hired far more teachers? Would that solve the problem of being able to have more individualized learning plans?
Sure. I think if you wanted to do this and say, look, we're going to put two teachers in each classroom, and so they can kind of because we have differentiated learning levels in the classroom, we're going to have two teachers who can kind of address that. Maybe that would work.
Okay.
This is just a way. It's a shortcut to equity, right? It's a way to let's lower standards and let's take away the gifted program rather than doing the hard work of bringing up the other, kids from poor and minority communities and getting them into the program and getting them these advantages. Let's just take it away for everyone. That is a big mistake.
We're out of time to debate that. We want to give listeners something to smile about. Did anything make you smile this week?
Weirdly enough, I have one.
Weird.
I know.
Gosh.
Weirdly enough, because normally I do it. Normally on the smile thing, I'm not in, right? So,
Don't smile much.
I haven't seen Mike smile in years.
I know.
He's a very dour.
I normally don't find my smile in Forbes, but I did this time. It turns out that we all know days are getting longer. That's when everyone gets a lot happier in Seattle, and I love the fact that it's sun rises earlier, sets later. Turns out the days overall are actually getting longer. Our Earth's rotation, is slowing by a few milliseconds a year.
I feel it.
And so by, in I don't know, 300,000 or 400,000 years, we're going to have even longer days. And for me, that gives me something to smile about.
It doesn't help us now because we're almost out of time. What else made you smile?
Fat Ham at Seattle Rep. Saw it last week. Amazing.
Oh,
Go
I'm
see it.
Definitely going to see Fat Ham
so good.
at the Rep. Thank you.
There was a free speech kerfuffle recently at Western Washington University that made me laugh out loud. And basically, some members of a racing team at Western Washington in a private Snapchat group posted a photo of a drawing of a penis on a pizza box, and they got reprimanded and disciplined for doing so, with the faculty advisor telling them, quote, "This is a symbol of white male power and domination, and therefore, quote, unacceptable."
What did you smile about this?
Yeah, really.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure when penises got coded as white.
Yeah.
That made me laugh. I was like, really? When did that happen? I missed that memo. Secondly, I am of the view that sometimes a penis drawing is just a penis drawing and doesn't have all of these big importance. But thirdly, I actually
wrap it up, brother. We're way over time.
I'll leave it at that.
That's it?
Yeah, that's what made me laugh.
Oh, okay.
I have a juvenile sense of humor.
Okay. All right, we have got to go. Thank you, Mike Lewis, Geekwire, Katherine Long, Business Insider, Seattle Nice Podcast, Sandeep Kaushik, Sandeep Kaushik, you political consultant. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again next week.